Morning, this is Ron Bickelman, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 6th and 7th issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Biden forcefully rejects calls to ditch his re-election bid. President Biden defiantly rejected calls to withdraw from the presidential race following last week's disastrous debate performance, telling voters in battleground Wisconsin that he was determined to win re-election against Donald Trump. Biden acknowledged at the rally in Madison that there was speculation about whether he might pull out of the contest in favor of another Democratic candidate ahead of the party's August convention in Chicago. Biden declared, "I'm in the running and going to win again," prompting cheers from the audience in the liberal enclave. "Guess what? They're trying to push me out of the race. Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I'm staying in the race," Biden said, reading from a teleprompter. The 81-year-old president is seeking to bolster his support at a crucial stretch, aiming to turn back a tide of doubts about his candidacy and ability to defeat the former president, who is a presumptive Republican nominee. After Wisconsin's rally, Biden was to sit with ABC News' George Stephanopoulos for an interview that was to air in full Friday night, the network said. Asked by reporters Friday whether he would quit, Biden said, "I'm completely ruling that out." He said he had spoken to roughly 20 members of Congress and they were urging him to continue his campaign. Biden said he was committed to holding another debate with Trump as planned and dismissed the idea of making changes to his campaign staff, saying, "Any mistake made is my fault." Biden moved gingerly in greeting voters ahead of the speech, giving hugs to some supporters. His delivery was forceful, while marked by occasional slip-ups that have drawn increased attention. At one point, he told supporters, "I beat Donald Trump. I beat him again in 2020, and then added, "By the way, we're going to do it again in 2024. In a reminder of Biden's challenges as president, walked on stage for the event, a young man standing in the camera shot behind the president displayed a sign that read, "Pass the torch, Joe." Other attendees gave him high marks. "I thought he looked alive, awake, and enthusiastic, and better than he does on TV," said Jill Enerson, 56, a teacher and a small business owner. In his comments, Biden made repeated jokes and references to his advanced years. "There have been a lot of discussions about my age. I know I look 40, he said, flashing a big smile. He then ticked off a series of Democratic political accomplishments, asking the audience if he was too old to score wins on student loans, climate, and naming the first black women Supreme Court justice, among other subjects. He then bolstered about the latest monthly jobs report. "How about 200,000 jobs we announced yesterday?" referring to a report that was actually released earlier Friday. Biden allies see the coming days as key to the president's re-election hopes, with a recent Wall Street Journal poll showing Trump opening up a bigger lead and voters' concerns about the president's fitness mounting after his disastrous debate last week. The Biden campaign said Friday that it plans to conduct a $50 million advertising blitz during July. Biden, along with Vice President Kamala Harris and their spouses, also plan to make stops in every battleground state, the campaign said, working to regain ground lost to Trump. Top Democratic lawmakers and donors have urged Biden to make his case directly to the voters and to stave off further calls for him to step aside ahead of next month's party convention. He did radio interviews this past week and muscled through an evening of 4th of July events in which he made forceful remarks but also stumbled over words at times. Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, has begun reaching out to other Democratic senators to discuss Biden's future, according to a person familiar with the matter, adding that the outreach is in its earliest stages. Asked by reporters about Warner's efforts, Biden said he thought that Virginia was the only one considering that in the Senate. On Friday, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey became the first Democratic governor to suggest Biden needs to evaluate his future. She praised Biden's tenure, but said the best way forward right now is a decision for the president to make. Over the coming days, I urge him to listen to the American people and carefully evaluate whether he remains our best hope to defeat Donald Trump, she said. The president had met Wednesday with Healy and other Democratic governors, who said Biden was clear-eyed about what needed to change following June 27th debate. The president expressed the need to be more unscripted and in public more, according to two people familiar with the meeting. One of the people said Biden in the meeting spoke of the need for more sleep and suggested he would avoid events that began after 8 p.m. because they tend to go late. Asked about those comments, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said the president works around the clock. Obviously, he also recognizes the importance of striking a balance and taking care of himself, just like we all have to, she said. In Wisconsin, Biden hoped to reassure Democrats in an attempt to shift the race away from a referendum on his ability to a choice between him and Trump. I think Joe Biden has been the best president in my lifetime, said Madison Democratic Mayor Satya Rodej Conway, who said she was eager to see what he can do with a second term. State Republicans pointed to Democrats distancing themselves from their presumptive nominee, noting absence of Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat from Wisconsin, who is seeking re-election this year and who was scheduled to hold the campaign events elsewhere in the state instead of joining Biden. In the span of less than 10 days, Biden campaign has gone from one of confidence to calamity to crisis, said State GOP Chairman Brian Schimming. Wall Street Journal poll released Wednesday found that Trump has a 6-point lead over Biden among voters nationally, with 80% saying the president is too old to run for a second term. The share of voters who say Biden is too old to run increased 7 points from the Journal's survey in February. Job data bolster case for September rate cut. Labor markets beat expectations in June, but there are signs of gradual cooling. The U.S. added a solid 206,000 jobs last month. The Labor Department reported on Friday, slightly beating expectations and continuing a remarkably strong run. But the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.1%, a sign of slack in the labor market that has already shown some hints of gradually slowing down. There are also indications as well that the job market is continuing to cool. Average hourly earnings were up 3.9% in June from a year ago earlier, marking their smallest gain since 2021. The counts for both April and May were revised lower by a combined 111,000 jobs. The labor force participation rate, the share of working age people who were employed or seeking work, ticked up 62.6%, an indication that more people entered the labor market. U.S. stocks rose with the Standard & Poor's 500 and the NASDAQ Composite hitting records. Treasury yields declined. The job report seems to have affirmed investors' view that the economy is slowing, but not in a drastic way that would prompt more aggressive rate cuts. For President Biden's re-election campaign, the continued job growth counts as a positive, but the rise in unemployment rate robs it of a valuable talking point. The June report marked the first time since 2021 that the unemployment rate was clocked above 4%. For the Federal Reserve, Friday's report provides further evidence that the labor market appears to have come into better balance. A hot labor market makes it more difficult for lower rates, while the central bank is also mandated to keep the job market as strong as possible without triggering inflation. There likely wasn't anything alarming enough in Friday's payroll report to lead Fed officials to push for a July rate cut. But eventually, some Fed officials will say that the risks of a further weakening in the labor market aren't desirable, even as others may argue that inflation still isn't showing enough progress to cut rates. While July may be too early for a rate cut, a mild inflation report next week could lead to the Fed doves who are more worried about labor market weakness to argue that there is time for the central bank to tee up a September rate cut. One risk is that experience has shown the labor market can go from strong to weak in a short order. While unemployment rate is 4.1%, it's still historically low. It is up from 3.4% earlier last year. The SOM rule, the rule of thumb, polarized by economist Claudia Shum, says that if the average rate of unemployment rate over 3 months raises a half percentage point or more above the lowest of the 3 points overage went over the previous year, the economy is in a recession. Over the past 3 months, the unemployment rate has averaged 4%, 0.4 of a percentage point above the 3-month average low of 3.6 over the past year. Hotter inflation at the start of the year derailed a possible June rate cut and has made risk management calculations more fraught. I don't want to pull up too short or too early and then have inflation stay high. That's a terrible, terrible situation, and I refuse to do that, San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly said in a recent interview. At the same time, officials can't just say for sure that because the labor market is strong today, it's going to be strong tomorrow, she said. One lesson of the Fed's belated start to raising interest rates 2 years ago, when officials incorrectly judged price increases would subside rapidly, is that when you're too confident that your view is correct, you're prone to mistakes, she said. Moreover, the Fed was able to fix its mistake 2 years ago by raising rates rapidly. If you're behind on cutting rates, then the labor market starts to falter. It's really challenging to get back on track. It's not the same, said Daly. High interest rates take time to fully work their way into the economy, but lately there have been more clearly damped activity. Even though wages have been rising faster than prices, growth in the consumer spending has slowed. If consumers cut back too much, employers could respond by cutting staff, turning what has been a virtuous cycle of rising employment and rising spending into a vicious one. Complicating the Fed's job, continuing pandemic-related distortions and the recent wave of immigration have made interpreting labor market signals more difficult. Job growth over the past year has been driven by 3 sectors: healthcare, government, and leisure and hospitality. Together they have accounted for 1.7 million of the 2.7 million jobs the economy has added over the past year. Much of that outsized growth is a matter of catching up, since all 3 sectors were much slower to get back to their pre-pandemic job levels than other employers. Employment in all 3 sectors still appear low relative to the pre-pandemic job growth trends, but it is unclear at what level demand for workers will be satiated, and once it is, overall job growth could slow markedly. Nor is it clear what the right level of job growth is to keep the labor market in balance. Before the pandemic, economists at Goldman Sachs reckoned that as a result of slowing population growth and more Americans hitting retirement age, the economy only needed to add around 70 to 80,000 jobs a month to keep unemployment rates steady. Now, as a result of the jump in immigration, they think it could be around 200,000. But that is with very little confidence, said Goldman's chief economist, Jan Hatzius. Estimating how many people have come into the country is more difficult. Moreover, while border crossings have fallen this year, there are likely still a large number of undocumented immigrants seeking asylum who are awaiting authorization from the government to be able to work. Given these difficulties, Hatzius thinks the best thing to do is to watch the unemployment rate, which measures the share of people working and seeking work who are unemployed. If it keeps turning higher in the months ahead, it will be an indication that the labor market has moved from a point of balance to one of deterioration. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. UK elects no drama Prime Minister after years of post-Brexit chaos. In 2020, Keir Starmer took over a Labour Party plagued with allegations of anti-Semitism and led by Jeremy Corbyn, a firebrand socialist who admired Venezuelan revolutionary Hugo Chavez and advocated nationalizing swaths of Britain's economy. Activists waved Palestinian flags at the Labour Party's annual meeting. Starmer, a former public prosecutor, put an end to all of that. He dragged the party to the center, rooted out members who expressed anti-Semitism attitudes, and 2 years after taking charge, instructed Labour members to sing "God Save the King" during the party's annual meeting. The only flags in the hall were Union Jacks. Now, 8 years later, after the UK voted to leave the European Union and entered an era of political and economic turmoil, British voters have asked the man known as No Drama Starmer to steady the entire country with his brand of dull competence. Starmer became Britain's Prime Minister after the Labour Party secured one of the biggest parliamentary majorities in its history. The Tories, meanwhile, slumped to its lowest vote share in modern history. The scale of the landslide victory was just shy of Labour's biggest previous win in 1997 under Tony Blair, who also ended a long period of conservative rule by pushing his party to the center, inaugurating a period of 13 years in power, the longest Labour has ever governed. Under Blair, however, the 61-year-old Starmer isn't charismatic, isn't offering, unlike Blair, however, he's not charismatic, isn't offering a vision of sweeping change, and isn't even particularly popular. Polls regularly show that slightly more voters disapprove than approve of him. Even his most ardent supporters say he owes his victory as much as to the implosion of the Conservative Party as to his own political transformation. Yet voters flock to Starmer as a salve for the post-Brexit chaos. In the course of 5 months in 2022, Britain has 3 different prime ministers and a financial run on the pound. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was kicked out of his party after repeated scandals, including throwing parties at 10 Downing Street during the pandemic lockdown and misleading Parliament. At a time when populist far-right parties are on the rise in Europe, the American politics is dominated by the presence of Donald Trump. Starmer will test whether citizens respond to someone who offers pragmatism over soaring rhetoric, sweeping promises, and populism. Politics is littered with people who shout very loudly about a problem, Starmer said a few years ago. There is a different type of passion, which is to say, what is the answer to that problem? As a student at Oxford, Starmer helped edit a Trotskyist magazine called Socialist Alternatives. His peers don't remember him for what he wrote, but rather the fact that he made sure the magazine was printed and handed out. Later on, as Britain's chief prosecutor, he put terrorists in jail, but listed one of his biggest achievements as moving the criminal justice system from paper to digital. As Labour leader, his first act was tweaking arcane party bylaws to tighten his control over how the policy was set. Starmer is the antithesis of Johnson, the last leader Britain elected back in 2019. The charismatic Johnson was the product of elite private school, sported wild blonde hair, quoted Latin, and painted a vision of sunlit uplands under Brexit. Starmer is from a modest background, wears glasses and a neat side part, doesn't have a favorite novel, is a wooden public speaker, and pitches himself as a man who can make tough choices in difficult times. Britons are impatient for change. The UK economy has only grown an average of 1.3% during the year since 2016. and real wages have stagnated in recent years. The country has 6.3 million people waiting for treatment on its state-run National Health Service. Public finances are constrained after doling out billions to the public during the pandemic and an energy crisis caused by the Ukraine war. Prisons are so full that criminals may have to soon be released early. Starmer spent most of the campaign underscoring what he won't do, raise taxes broadly or sharply boast spending, because he says Britain can't afford it. Instead, his pledges are on a 5-point plan that include cutting red tape to build more houses, reducing immigration, creating a fund to accelerate the building out of green energy infrastructure, and making it easier for people to get appointments in the health system. On foreign policy, Labor is also promising continuity, keeping the U.S. close and supporting Ukraine. Starmer says he is pro-business and wants to patch up the relations with Europe, but not to reverse Brexit. Not a politician, Starmer is something of an oddity in Westminster. It's nearly unheard of for a British politician with so little experience in politics to win a general election, says Robert Hayward, a pollster and conservative member of the House of Lords. Starmer, who also entered politics 9 years ago, he doesn't know the Labour Party, he said. He is coming from the outside. Interviews with a dozen people who have worked with Starmer paint a picture of a toiler who has used meticulous grind to achieve results. He leans into his reputation. When a man on the campaign trail asked him why he was so dry, Starmer drew laughs and replied, "Cheers, mate." He also has a ruthless streak and has proven himself unafraid to jettison allies or policies. After the 26th Brexit referendum, he spent years campaigning to stop Britain leaving the EU. Running for Labour's leadership in 2020, he positioned himself as an ally to the left, pledging to nationalize Britain's energy sector and remove college tuition fees. He called Corbyn a friend. Within months of becoming Labour leader, he threw out those policies, suspended Corbyn from the party, and accepted Brexit. In the past alone, he scraped a long vaunted $28 billion a year green investment plan and watered down policy to improve workers' rights. It has turned him into a hate figure for the far left of the party and left many traditional Labor voters unenthusiastic about him. The man is a barefaced liar, says James Schneider, who was in charge of the Labor's communications under Corbyn. Others say it's simply Starmer's evolution towards the center. He's espoused some quite left-wing views, says Andrew Cooper, who went to school with Starmer and previously advised former Tory Prime Minister David Cameron. But along the way, what he's acquired is the sort of understanding that drove the Blair government, which is that there isn't any point in having a progressive principles if you don't win. Starmer grew up just south of London in Oxted, an affluent suburb and conservative heartland. His parents named their son after the Labour Party's founder, Keir Hardie. His father was a toolmaker and devoted himself to caring for Starmer's mother, a former nurse who suffered a rare form of inflammatory arthritis that left her struggling to walk, and he became the first person in his family to graduate from university. After school, Starmer embarked on a career as a libertarian human rights lawyer. He gained plaudits for representing people who faced death penalty in the Caribbean and in Africa, winning several landmark cases, including one that helped overturn the mandatory death penalty in Uganda. He worked pro bono for nearly a decade, defending two vegetarian activists whom McDonald's sued for libel after they contributed leaflets circulating criticizing the company. The McLibel case was only partially successful. McDonald's won damages, but suffering a hit to its reputation. In 2008, Starmer became UK's Director of Public persecutions. He spent 9 months visiting all 42 of the persecution service regional offices. Its budget was cut by around a third as the ruling conservative government sliced public spending to patch up the government's finances. Starmer said he felt the scale of the spending cuts risked damaging the foundations of the British welfare state created in the wake of World War II. Already in his 50s, he entered politics as a labor lawmaker. The Labor Party was born in 1900 out of the trade union movement. By the 1990s, as the party reinvented itself as a center-left grouping under Blair, but following the 2007-2008 financial crisis and a new rule that allowed non-members to pay a small fee and vote for the Labor leader, a wave of mainly young left-wing members poured into the party and lifted Corbyn, a bearded socialist, to its helm in 2015. While the Labor lawmakers refused to serve under Corbyn, Starmer entered Parliament in 2015 and worked his shadow cabinet. Starmer campaigned for Corbyn during a 2019 election, and during Labor pitched a 4-hour day work weekend and the nationalization of the country's broadband infrastructure. Cleaning house. Corbyn, who was once described members of Hamas and Hezbollah as friends, had allowed thousands of complaints of racism by Jewish labor members to go unresolved. Britain's chief rabbi publicly warned of a poison infecting the labor movement. Corbyn denies he is anti-Semitic and has apologized for calling people linked to militant groups his friends. Voters balked and Labor slumped to its worst defeat since 1935. Within 3 days of becoming Labor leader, Starmer organized a video meeting with Jewish representatives and apologized. Starmer, whose wife is Jewish heritage, said it was a moral imperative to fix the problem. After an Equality and Human Rights Commission report concluded that Labor had broken the law by indirectly discriminating against Jewish members, Corbyn said the scale of the problem was dramatically overstated by opponents. Starmer suspended him in the ensuing months, and dozens of staff members were hired to go through complaints. Party rules were changed to make it faster to discipline Labor members, and hundreds were kicked out of the party. Starmer's tenure nearly came to an end. In 2021, the party lost a special election in Hartlepool, a Labor heartland, to the Conservatives, which nearly prompted him to quit, aides said. Starmer's aides looked to other social Democrats across the world for inspiration. They saw how the Biden campaign had succeeded against Trump in 2020 by promising an alternative to chaos. In Germany and Australia, stayed center-left politicians Olaf Scholz and Anthony Albanese had won victories running tightly disciplined, unshowy campaigns, says Claire Ainsley, who was Starmer's executive director of policy. We needed to target towns and suburbs around the country, she said. We couldn't just be the party of metropolitan voters in big cities. That meant ditching a lot of progressive policies, presented themselves as a party which respected national security and business, she says. Not long after the rocky period when former Tory Prime Minister Liz Truss quit amid a sell-off of the pound, Starmer was asked if the time was right for Mr. Boring. I think what they want a serious politician, Starmer said, a serious prime minister. So that's a yes, the interviewer asked. Yes, said Starmer. Costco and Sam's Club are full of young adults, bulk shopping. Young adults are battling sticker shock at the grocery store by supersizing their groceries. They are turning to bulk purchases, splitting their food costs with friends, roommates, families, and neighbors. Shoppers in their 20s and 30s are trying to fight higher prices by joining warehouse giants such as Costco and Sam's Club. Generation Z shoppers represent the fastest growing member group at Walmart-owned Sam's Club, a spokeswoman says. Membership for shoppers ages 27 and under rose 63% during the past 2 fiscal years. Gen Z and Millennium customers 28 to 43 now make up a quarter of the Sam Club members. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The growth is partially because the Gen Zers are entering adulthood and also because they are drawn to lower per unit food costs, says Rupesh Parikh, Senior Equity Research Analyst for the financial services company Oppenheimer. They also see the warehouse stores huge crates of tomato sauce and gargantuan packs of chicken as a way to divide and conquer. Almost 4 in 10 shoppers between the ages of 25 and 34 split bulk groceries with friends, neighbors, roommates, and family, according to a June survey of more than 1,000 shoppers by the market research firm Advantage Solutions. A third of all people questioned in the survey said they shop this way. Food prices might be rising more slowly than in the 2022 and 2023 peaks, but the lingering effects of inflation is the Americans spend an average of 11.2% of their disposable personal income on food, a number of approaching highs not seen in 3 decades, according to the most recent Agriculture Department data. The retailers don't love membership sharing. Costco has on-site ID checks, and both Costco and Sam's Club limit members to 2 guests per visit. But both have reported net sale increases this year. Stocking up. Andrew Watson, a pre-med student at Northwestern University, piles into a Hyundai with his 4 roommates every 2 weeks and heads up to Sam's Club. They use one of the roommates' membership and have never gotten in trouble for it, he says. Each roommate chips in about $60 a week for groceries, he said. The roommates enjoy eating the same food, especially chicken breasts. They stock up on large packs of chicken to the grill, saute or bake with rice. We come together as a house every day. It really helps us to be cohesive, says Watson, 21. Buying in bulk is a no-brainer. Autumn Lucy, 35, lives in the Detroit area with her family. The tech industry worker buys in bulk and splits groceries with her mother and sister who live elsewhere. She and her sister use the mother's membership and often shop together. Items on frequent rotation include cherry tomatoes and granola bars. It's become a family activity and a way for us to spend time together, Lucy says. When our son was born, I was so excited to bring him to Sam's Club for the first time. He got to sit in the cart. Grandma pushed the cart for him, and he got to spend one-on-one time with Grandma while I was shopping. Cards on the table. Nearly 128 million people have held Costco cards as of 2023. The company said in December, with membership fees running between $60 to $120. Sam's Club membership runs between $50 to $110 yearly. Sam's Club doesn't track whether consumers are bulk buying or splitting. A Walmart spokesperson said Costco didn't respond to a request for comment. Bulk buying and splitting isn't foolproof, some consumers say. Divak Nanda, a recent computer science graduate of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, split bulk groceries with his college roommates. Then he realized he wasn't saving money under the system, and it wasn't enjoying the hassle of it either. When he and his roommates would walk 20 minutes each way to Costco, having a rolling cart with them, the grocery barely fit in their tiny kitchen, he says. The group rushed to finish the food before it went bad. My first little bit of friction was basically whatever you buy, especially if you're somebody who cooked it, what you're going to be eating for a while, Nanda says. It gets pretty boring. Nanda says he built a spreadsheet to calculate whether shopping at Costco was saving the group money. It wasn't. In the end, he jokes, the only thing he felt he was getting out of his Costco membership was the chain's famous $1.50 hot dog and soda combo. In U.S. news, Trump prosecutors have been a political gift. Trump prosecutions have been a political gift. How 91 counts that seemed poised to end his campaign made it stronger. A year ago, the legal system seemed to be closing in on Donald Trump. Prosecutors painted a sweeping portrait of a president who allegedly tried to overturn the results of an election he knew he lost, hung on to classified documents he knew he should return, and secretly paid off a porn star to keep quiet about the affair he knew voters would care about. No one in America, a prosecutor said, not even a former president, is above the law. Instead, 4 different cases against him have boosted his third bid for the White House and paved the way for him to enjoy an unprecedented level of authority if he gets there. While a Manhattan jury in May found Trump guilty of 34 counts of hush money on a hush money case, jail time seemed unlikely. His other cases have been delayed and likely curtailed in court. Instead of turning off voters with their detailed discrepancy or descriptions of misconduct, the prosecutions rallied supporters. The Supreme Court decision this past week to effectively shield Trump from prosecution for many acts he took as president has cast into sharper focus a question that has haunted the criminal investigations of the former president from the start. If the point of prosecution is to hold someone accountable for wrongdoing and punish them within the judicial system, what happens if the prosecution ends up being a political gift? You do see some erosion of the credibility of the Department of Justice with the half of the population that disagrees with you, said Greg Soffer, a longtime former federal prosecutor who was the U.S. attorney in San Antonio during the Trump administration, adding that the disparate local and federal cases had the effect of looking like a pile-on. While prosecutors focus on the facts of individual cases, they also assess if a case is in the public interest and try to avoid influencing elections and politics as much as they can. Those varied ideas have crashed into each other in pursuit of Trump. The day he was convicted in May, falsifying records to cover up the hush money payment, small donors poured a record-shattering $34.8 million into his campaign. Delayed tactics by Trump's legal team and his own characterization of the prosecutions as a politically motivated effort to keep him from office appear to have been effective. In the latest journal poll, 47% of voters said Trump's conviction showed that the legal system holds people accountable, while 49% of the people said it showed the legal system is influenced by political pressure. From the outset, each prosecutor stressed their Trump probes were just like every other one they'd undertake. When Jack Smith got his first indictment of Trump in June of 2023, charging him with improperly hanging on to the classified documents, he said, applying those laws, collecting facts, that's what determines the outcome of an investigation. Last August, when Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis announced the 4th case, she said it was her office's 11th RICO indictment under her watch. We followed the same processes, she said, but within months, Willis's case stalled amid revelations she had a romantic relationship with the lawyer she selected as her deputy. The classified documents case got assigned to a judge in Florida whom Trump nominated and who has shown she was open to considering legal arguments from Trump's team that other judges might have cast aside. Trump's lawyers could hardly believe their luck. What was the mystique of John Gotti, said Timothy Parlatore, who represented Trump in the reference to how the mobster's reputation grew as he was acquitted. 3 times he kept beating the government. At the outset of the Trump investigation, Attorney General Merrick Garland drew on deliberative approach he honed over 2 decades on the federal bench. He and other officials felt that using weak legal theories could open cases up to Supreme Court appeals. In the federal election interference case, the federal counsel's office charged Trump with 4 counts for his actions that accumulated in the January 6, 2021 attack by his supporters of the U.S. Capitol. Trump was accused of pressing false claims that the election had been marred by fraud with officials in battleground states. He lost in pushing his Justice Department and Vice President to take unlawful actions, even though he was told they had no merit. Some former prosecutors questioned the indictment's legal footing, saying it didn't clearly define in what specific moments Trump's actions became criminal. Others said legal theories are novel because the facts are, too, never before has a defeated president been accused of trying to block the peaceful transfer of power to his successor. In that case, Trump asked the Supreme Court to consider if it was immune from prosecution. Some prosecutors expected the court could narrow the case to exclude some of the allegations as official acts by a president and protect them from protection. But the far-ranging opinion, a 6-3 ruling, said former President enjoy sweeping immunity for their acts while in office went beyond what many anticipated. In addition to saying presidents can't be prosecuted for actions that fall under their core duties, it said prosecutors couldn't inquire into presidents' motives to divide official from unofficial conduct. It also said any prosecution related to an official act would have to pose no danger to intruding on the authority and functions of the executive branch, a new high bar. Trump celebrated the decision as an even better than expected, brilliantly written and wise, he posted on social media. Proud to be an American. The next day, his campaign said it raised another $111.8 million in June, the first month of his New York conviction. Wisconsin again will use ballot drop boxes. Wisconsin voters once again can use absentee ballot drop boxes to deliver their votes after the state Supreme Court on Friday reinstated their use, overturning its 2022 ban. In a 4-3 ruling issued Friday, the court's majority said the state law allows the use of secure drop boxes as an alternative to returning absentee ballots to the clerk's office or by mail. Our decisions today does not force or require that any municipal clerks use drop boxes, the majority wrote. The statute does not specify a location to which a ballot must be returned and requires only that the ballot be delivered to a location the municipal clerk within his or her discretion designates, it wrote. The decision reverses the court's 2022 finding that Wisconsin law required absentee ballots be returned by mail or in person. Absentee and by mail ballots have become a political dividing line in recent years. Many states expanded the use of ballot drop boxes during the 2020 elections amid the pandemic, prompting a backlash from then President Donald Trump and other Republicans. The Wisconsin court reheard the arguments in May after a shift in the court's makeup within the election of liberal-leaning Justice Janet Protasiewicz last summer. Although the state legislature has made no major changes to Wisconsin's relevant election laws in the interim. A lengthy dissent penned by Rebecca Grazi Bradley supported. The two other justices argued that the ruling was made for political reasons, not analysis of the law. The majority ends the term by loosening the legislative's regulations governing the privilege of absentee voting in the hopes of tipping scales in future elections, she wrote. Nationwide, voters in 39 states used nearly 13,000 drop boxes to return their mail ballots in 2022, according to the federal agency that monitors elections, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. The commission found that about 40% of the mail ballots returned by voters were returned to a drop box, according to a 2023 report among states able to track the data. In Wisconsin, election clerks installed more than 500 ballot drop boxes across the state for the 2020 election, state officials said. Wisconsin allows all registered voters to request absentee ballots, including by using an online form which requires photo ID, which must be returned by 8 p.m. on election day. The state saw a record increase in voters choosing to vote absentee during the 2020 election, the state records show. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Conservative groups and some Wisconsin voters sued the state Election Commission in 2021, arguing that drop boxes were illegal and contending that state officials improperly encouraged voters to use the boxes. They said state law required a voter to personally mail or deliver a ballot to the municipal election clerk. State officials said they only advise clerks on best practices. Drop boxes have proven to be an accessible, secure, easy way for Wisconsinites to exercise their right to vote, said James Stein, Deputy Advocacy Director of the ACLU of Wisconsin, which has supported the pro-ballot box arguments before the ruling. Representative of the conservative group that led the initial lawsuit to ban the drop boxes called Friday's ruling a grave and historic mistake. Continuing in the exchange. Berries have never tasted better. Here's the juicy backstory. The berries of American future are as rich and juicy as the story of how they came to be. They look resplendent. They taste like candy and fruit punch. They're firm enough to hold shape when you bite into one and soft enough that it will melt in your mouth. They're also related to the blueberry halfway across the world that was nearly lost to history. It's typically a cool morning in Northern California before fog makes its way for yet another sunny day when Soren Bjorn grabs, twists, and snaps a perfectly ripe strawberry right off the plant. As chief executive of Driscoll's, the world's largest berry company, he knows everything about the luscious hunk of fruit in his hands, and he knows how it's something of a miracle. Every year, the company develops and studies 125,000 strawberry varieties in search of a handful of what Driscoll will sell across the country and around the world. But until recently, one type of strawberry never actually made its way to the grocery store. We threw out the absolute sweetest, best-tasting berries that we had in our whole gene pool, Bjorn said. For most of Driscoll's history, the company dumped the mouth-watering strawberries early in the process of bringing in new variety from seedling to grocery shelf. They disappeared because they had some kind of genetic flaw. A bunch of reasons the sweet berries were amongst least viable commercial berries. They were soft, too susceptible to disease, and their shelf life was too short. They weren't red enough for consumers or efficient enough for harvesters. Or there weren't enough of them, Bjorn says. There was a negative correlation between sweetness and yield, which presented a problem that would take Driscoll's more than a century to solve. Strawberries with more red flavor tend to be less abundant. that is, the most heavenly strawberries weren't thrown away despite their taste. They were thrown away because of their taste. We got all excited about all the varieties that we were throwing away, Bjorn said, and we wondered how much consumers would be willing to pay for the best berry they ever got to try. They decided to find out. Driscoll is now selling the ultra-flavored strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries under a fitting label, Sweetest Batch. They're expensive and available only in limited quantities during certain times of the year, but Americans are stretching their berry budgets to buy them. The U.S. berry market is worth about $9 billion annually, which is up more than 40% over the past 5 years, according to Nielsen IQ. Strawberries are the most popular berry, but the entire category is one of the most promising areas of growth in the entire grocery store. In fact, berries now sell twice as much as any other fruit. Most shoppers buy regular berries. Others splurge on organic berries, but more are now filling their carts with these luxury berries. If you want to know how to find them, all you have to do is look at the label. Yellow for conventional berries and green for organics. If you spot a clamshell with a Driscoll's Sweetest Batch sticker, you're staring at the premium brand. A dozen strawberries might set you back $6.99. I've seen 11-ounce containers of blueberries for $10.99 and $12.99 in stores that are right next door to each other. The organic raspberries cost about 30% more than a box of conventional raspberries, and a carton of the Sweetest Batch raspberries costs another 30% more per pound. With those different price points and flavor profiles, the berry display has become more like a grocery category. I think it's like wine, said Eric Brown, who leads the Whole Foods Market produce procurement. Sweet Batch is a tiny part of Driscoll's overall revenue for now. It takes between 5 to 7 years to breed a new variety, and the first Sweetest Batch products hit the market 5 years ago, starting with strawberries and raspberries. They account for about 20% of the private-owned company's blueberry sales, which executives say is a reasonable goal for the entire premium line. The other goal of the Sweet Batch program is to boost the quality of Driscoll strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries. By selecting the berries with traits they want, they are keeping those genes around for longer, which means every batch will get sweeter. It might sound obvious that a company in the business of making strawberries decided to make one that tasted better, but in breeding to improve flavor, Driscoll's might as well have declared that it was trying to make strawberries that were fluorescent green. The idea was so surprisingly counterintuitive that Bourne himself admits the Sweetest Batch program was a little bit of an accident. One thing about innovation is that sometimes it's just right in front of you, he said. Our tendency to look really far and get all complicated about it, but sometimes it's really simple. This is the kind of innovation that's right there in front of us, and we don't know it and we don't know what to do with it. Finding the sweet spot. To find out what they did and how they did it, I visited the Drab Office Park in Driscoll. Keeps its headquarters a short drive from the farms busting with strawberries and raspberries. Bjorn was hired by Driscoll in 2006, climbed the executive ranks, and started as CEO this year. We jumped in his car and visited the farms nearby. He explained that pivotal moment for the Sweetest Batch program was when Driscoll's partners in Australia found a blueberry that was succulent, crunchy, and too good to waste. Tasted amazing, Bjorn said, but it was significantly less productive than less amazing blueberries, and it would never see the light of day, Bjorn said, unless we could make it really premium from a price standpoint. It may have started by accident, but there was nothing accidental about what happened once they worked the economics of the amazing berries. They took the Sweetest Batch concept and applied it across the berry patch. There's a sticker shock in every part of the grocery store these days, but no matter how much they might cost, Americans continue to inhale berries. They're the rare food that can be eaten as breakfast or dessert. They're also snackable more than any other food, and they have one of the highest household penetration rates in the produce aisle, which meant there was an opportunity for a new one. When the company began exploring the possibility of releasing premium berries, Driscoll identified promising varieties already in the pipeline, while the company breeding specialists were given permission to do something they had never done before. You can lower your yield requirement, Bjorn said, if you can get away with something that's really, really tasty. Every berry is a genetic compromise because it's selecting one trait means sacrificing another. In theory, Driscoll's breeders can optimize the berry that's sweeter than the ones that currently exist. In reality, that berry would probably be so fragile that it would barely get across the street, much less alone across the country. Even the really, really tasty, sweetest batch berry variety must satisfy Driscoll's criteria for productivity, efficiency, and market condition. The quest for flavor involves Driscoll's sensory analysis, plant pathologists and molecular geneticists, even top executives have cups of berries waiting at their desk every day for a consumer lab to collect data. And the company gets input from people who have been recruited from their sophisticated palates, super tasters. Taste is subjective, but Driscoll's wanted to make it more objective. The company developed a sensory wheel that includes more than 100 different words to describe taste: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, texture, crunchy, melty, firm, mushy, mouthfeel, juicy, chalky, refreshing, puckering, astringent, effervescent, and flavor and aroma, fruity, candied, floral, and herbal. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from July 6th and 7th issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend. Your reader has been Ron Bickelman. Thank you for listening.